that we can go into the details of how to get things set up in Fusion, making sure you're very comfortable with it, especially because compositing and working with nodes is unfamiliar to a lot of people if you haven't done it before, if you don't do it a lot, or you're coming from other apps that use a layer-based system or just haven't done anything in Fusion before. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable with what we're doing, what's going on, and how to take advantage of Fusion so that you feel empowered to continue your learning. In a couple weeks, there will be an advanced course. So if you are already very familiar with Fusion or you've done one of the certifications for Fusion before, you may enjoy that more, or maybe be more suited to your level of knowledge. And that will be there will be a link to that in the chat as well. The panelists can share that. But this week, for the 3 days we have together this week, I want to make sure it's beginner friendly. We'll go at a pace so that you feel like you're getting what you need. And Cristiano, thank you, has just put that in the chat. I guess I should say who I am. Hello, I'm Gadali. Looks like some in the chat know who I am already. So if I've seen you before, welcome back. And for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of being in a training with, hello, I'm Gadali Gubrek. I live in Los Angeles. I am a filmmaker, director. I'm a Blackmagic Design certified trainer. I do some of the trainings for Blackmagic Design. I also teach at AFI Conservatory, American Film Institute in Los Angeles. I'm the founder of dvresolve.com that curates tutorials for DaVinci Resolve. What else do I do? I'm an occasional colorist and VFX artist, so in addition to producing, directing films, I'm also working on the post-production side, helping other productions on the VFX side of things and color side of things. So you may have seen me in the colorist training that Daria teaches. I tend to help out with that. So happy to be here. Happy to be talking about Fusion, and this will be fun. This week's course is 3 days, so it's today, it's tomorrow, it's Wednesday. We have 4 hours scheduled each day. Um, we'll go slowly, but we also might not fill up the whole time. I want to make sure I'm not overloading you, as 4 hours is a lot of time and there's a lot of things to take in. So want to make sure that you're not overloading your brains, but you're able to download the information into your head without getting overwhelmed. What else? I'm not alone here today, so we have two panelists who are just off stage, hiding in the background, but not too hidden. They are in the chat and in the Q&A. We have Cristiano and Noel, who are also Blackmagic Design certified DaVinci Resolve trainers and are very knowledgeable in this. So, hello. What do you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hello, hello. Hello, my name is Chris. You can call me Chris. It's easier. And we are here to help you guys in this journey with Yadali. Um, can guarantee you guys that you are in good hands. Yadali, is a very good instructor. And for this course, what you need to maintain is just relax, okay? Relax, take it easy, and I hope you have a good day over there. If you need any help, ask us in the Q&A, and have a good day. Have a good training.
Thanks, Chris. Noel, hello.
Hello, hello. Yes, it's working.
Yeah, we can hear
The
you.
audio. Well, I'm Nawal. I'm an instructor here with Cristiano and Gedali. So maybe you saw us in any other training. I'm a collaborating author of the new training guides in the Beginner's Guide to DaVinci Resolve 19, and I'm located in Argentina. I'm a colorist and VFX artist, and also a director when things works. I directed a feature film that will be in the new guides. And yes, Gedali is a great instructor. He also has a great YouTube channel that maybe we should post there. And yes, enjoy. It's a great class. And Gedali is a great professional and a great
Oh
instructor.
no.
So it's gonna be
Thank
fun.
you. They're hyping me up. Thank you. Makes me feel better. Uh, yeah, and these panelists are also absolute masters, so they're teachers of all topics in their own right. So we're technically you could ask them other questions. We're focused on Fusion today, but if there are related things about Resolve in general, feel free to ask. Quick things about questions here, you'll notice like there is a chat, so everyone is in the chat. Feel free to post there to say hello to the community or answer things between yourselves. If you do have questions for me or Chris or Noel, post it in the Q&A section. So that is a better place to post a question about what we're covering or Resolve in general so that we see it and can make sure to answer it. So post your questions there. If you post a question in the chat, we can't guarantee that it will get answered only because the chat scrolls fairly quickly. So keep that for general chat amongst the group. And there's a lot of knowledgeable people in the chat as well. Some people have been through these trainings before and are learning, reviewing, and also may have some answers for you as well. These sessions will not be recorded, and we ask you not to do any of your own recording for it. Part of the deal with Blackmagic Design of keeping these free is that it is only live. So we're just here live over Zoom, and we're here to learn in person and have this experience. If you need any sort of additional materials, there are things on the Blackmagic Design website. So there's a link in the chat there. Let me actually, I think I can show this off. On this page, on the Blackmagic Design website, Blackmagic Design /products /DaVinci Resolve /training. There is this training website or page on the Blackmagic Design website. There are training videos here on many different topics for DaVinci Resolve. There's a Fusion section here with videos and project files you can download, and then the main curriculum is these training books. So there's a beginner's guide, editor's guide, colorist guide, visual effects guide, which is Fusion. There are new versions of these that will be coming out at some point this year for version 19. We don't have, I don't know the dates yet. I know they're in the works and they'll be ready when they'll be ready. So I couldn't tell you when they will be ready, but these are here. And although we're on version 19 with DaVinci Resolve, 99% of the information and the features are the same. They're not, the app doesn't look totally different suddenly in each version. So all of the things are still there. All of these projects will work in version 19 or 19.1. And then there are a few new features that are in version 19 that we can talk about later in the week. So that is that right there. Let's see. We've introduced ourselves. We've got let's see. We have the resources being shared in the chat as well. So if you do want to follow along, you can. There are some downloads that are also available on that Blackmagic website, but the link is available in the chat so you can follow along. A note on following along. If you are brand new to DaVinci Resolve or you're new to Fusion, I will suggest that you just watch and learn. Especially if you are on a single screen laptop or something like that, it is difficult to bounce between trying to do it on your own and also trying to watch what's going on screen in Zoom. And if you feel like you might get lost because of that, I would highly recommend that you just sit back, relax, and let some knowledge soak in. I think, especially when you're excited to learn, you may feel the need to want to do everything and also try to memorize everything that comes at you. That's not actually how we learn. It tends to be a process of building familiarity with something, then later recalling some aspect of it, and then doing it and repeating it and repeating it until you can integrate it into your work without having to reference something. That said, Fusion runs deep. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of features, there are a lot of things to remember, there's a lot of nodes, there's a lot of things you can do. So memorizing this stuff isn't the goal. My hope for you is that you're able to understand the basic principles of how things work and what you're able to accomplish so that you can later go to that PDF guide and follow along to remind yourself or at least build enough familiarity of the features or the naming conventions of things so that you know what to search for in the manual or the PDF lesson plan later or know just enough to poke around in the interface and find what you need. So again, don't worry about memorizing everything or following along if you are new. And if you have run through the certification class before or have some familiarity with Fusion and feel comfortable, feel free to follow along. I'll go just slow enough so that you can do what I'm doing. But again, it's not required. You have the option to download the materials and follow along that way. We do have some questions coming in here. So let me go through a few of these. Charles is wondering if the Fusion separate app is significantly different from DaVinci built-in Fusion. So for those of you who don't know, Fusion was a separate app, a VFX compositing app created by Ion Software, and DaVinci or Blackmagic Design acquired it several years ago and have then integrated it into DaVinci Resolve, so it's all part of the same program. However, there is still a standalone separate Fusion app. It is not significantly different, Charles, to answer your question. It's basically the same thing in its own standalone app, just that page. The reason it exists still as a standalone is because advanced VFX workflows tend to favor just having that app because in a VFX post house where there's a lot of artists, they're working on one shot at a time and they want all the resources focused on just doing that. They don't need to go between a timeline and a color page or Fairlight, things like that. So it has some advantage for specialists for VFX. For most people, I'd say just opening it up in Resolve is great. It's all integrated in there. You can be working on your timeline in your edit, and then when you want to create a title or do some simple compositing, it's all right there. It's integrated in the timeline. It's a great thing to have just all in one place. So I can do my edit, I can do some color work, I can bounce to Fusion. It's good to go and have a certain workflow order, but you can bounce around as needed. Let's see. Uh, any Chris or Noel, any introductory things that people are asking that we should cover here?
No, I think we're good. We're really good to go.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about what we'll be doing. Flying right along. All right. So, like I said, we have 3 days this week, and we are using the 18 lesson plan, that PDF on the page that has been linked in the chat. Day one is lesson one in the book. But it's also we're going to be covering a few things that aren't in the book, just as I give a few tips and we get very comfortable in Resolve, especially, or in Fusion in Resolve, especially if you're new. Like I said before, nodes are different. Not everyone is familiar with working on them. So if you've never touched a node before, you'll feel better about it after today. So we'll talk about Fusion, the interface, how to work with nodes, and then we'll do some very simple basics of compositing. And I should define that term. Compositing is a VFX workflow of putting things together. So this can be putting a background and then someone on a green screen and putting them on top of each other, but really it's just putting a background and a foreground together. It can be, it doesn't have to be live action things. It can be images. You can create motion graphics in Fusion. And there are some trainings for motion graphics that I think will happen again next quarter. So if you're not on the email list for the Blackmagic Design free trainings, at some point we can share a link to that so you can sign up, but that is also possible. So that's day one. Tomorrow we'll be covering lessons 3 and 4, at least get started on lesson 4. So we'll talk about replacing a sky. We'll talk about tracking objects, replacing things in a frame. So again, we're getting into VFX of what's possible. We can replace the sky with something else. We can track an object onto something else. So common thing that happens in projects is we need to paint out something, or we need to put a sign onto or a screen onto a screen. So like you may not be filming the TV screen with the actual thing that's there in real life. Most of the times when you see a movie or a TV show and there's people on there and they're watching TV, whatever's on the TV in the final movie was not there on set. It is very common that it is either off or has something else on there, and that is replaced in post with VFX. So that helps, control things on set, but also lets you change things after the fact. So we'll work on that. And day 3, we'll go into keying. Keying is the process of identifying certain pixels in the image that we want to do something with, in this case, remove. So and we'll be working with green screen. So you may have heard the term chroma keying, which is identifying colors that we want to then, in this case, remove and replace with the background. So we'll go through that process in detail, and yeah, plenty to do, but we'll keep it chill. We'll be slow paced and get through it comfortably and answer your questions along the way. Let's see. How long will these sessions be? So 4 hours per day. Are there going to be more after these Intro to Fusion is done? Yes. So again, there is a advanced couple of days in a few weeks. We can have the list or the links to that in the chat. I believe they're already in there somewhere. And if you need the downloads, make sure you are in checking the chat or asking the Q&A, and Chris or Noel can give you that link. Let's start with, and Noel just posted it. So download that link if you haven't already, if you want to follow along. Again, you don't need to follow along if you're totally new to this. Just focus on absorbing the information as much as you can. Don't try to memorize. Don't try to follow along if you feel like going back and forth is too hard for you. I highly recommend just watching and learning. If you have some experience, then by all means, follow along. I do know from experience with these that those who are brand new and are trying to toggle between watching and learning and doing it, and if you run into a problem, then you start missing things that we're covering live. So it's okay to just sit back and learn and try to absorb, because a version of this training, or at least this material, will be covered again in future quarters, as well as available in the PDF guide that you can download from the Blackmagic Design website. Let's go over adding our project. So if you've downloaded the material, here we go, and unzipped it, you should have a few files in there, or folders, I should say, and we can add that to our project. So today we're just going to be using the gettingstarted.dra. A .dra is a DaVinci Resolve archive. So it looks like a folder on my computer. If I click into it, it's a folder. I can see things inside of it. But the DRA itself is a format that can be exported from DaVinci Resolve that includes both the project itself, including timelines, bins, things like that, as well as the media. So this is a good thing to have if you want to just take everything from a project and send it to someone else, or archive it, or move it to a different machine. This is different than exporting a timeline or an XML or just the project itself. If you have a DRP, which is the DaVinci Resolve project, that does not include media. That's just the project. That's just the timelines and bins and your preferences. So what we're going to be doing is importing this getting started.dra. So if you're here, you open DaVinci Resolve, you can click on this home icon in the lower right to get to your project manager. And I can right click here and I'm going to select Restore Project Archive. So make sure you choose this, not Import Project, Restore Project Archive. This is the step that is necessary for importing a DRA. So I'm going to click that, and then I've got my files over here. Let's bring that back. And I'm going to drag and drop. Let's do that again. Drag and drop getting started.dra into that section, and I have it. So while I'm here, I want to make sure I'm not selecting anything else. I'm not trying to select this project.drp. I'm selecting the folder itself, getting started.dra, and clicking open. Now, let me do it wrong for just a second because this is a common thing that I see people do is they will click import project and get to getting started DRA and then adding project.drp. This is only opening the project. If I do that, the media will not be linked and I'll have to relink everything manually. That's not the end of the world if you do it that way, but that is making it just a little bit harder on yourself. So make sure as you're doing this, we go to right click in my project manager, restore project archive, and I navigate to the folder wherever you downloaded things, and I go to getting started.dra. I'm not clicking on this folder. I'm not clicking on another folder. Getting started.dra. And once that is selected, I can click open, and it's importing the project. And now I have this getting started project that is now in my project manager. Once you have that, I can go ahead and double click it and open it up. And now I've got a project and I'm currently in a timeline. We can just navigate around and see what's in there. I have my master bin here. There's some timelines in it. There's a start. There's a final. So if you want to see what this looks like at the end, you can navigate to the final timeline. You can also change timelines coming up to your viewer here. And there's other timelines for pieces along the way. So if you get lost and you want to skip ahead, you can use some of these or just go to the final. But if you're starting and you're following along, let's use the start timeline. There's also some media in here. So there are a couple assets we have. We have some footage. We have a piece of footage, CG, computer generated, that we will use to composite, and this file that is Handroto, which I'll explain a little bit later. But those are the three assets that are in here that should be linked if you've correctly imported the DaVinci Resolve archive and added that. If your interface looks different than mine, that's because I've changed a few settings, but you can always go to Workspace and reset UI layout, and then Resolve will get back to factory settings and reset the interface to open the media pool and have two viewers open and resize your timeline and things like that. I'm going to be resizing a few things just because I want to make sure you can see what I'm showing you. And so, for example, I'm clicking on this, clicking on this rectangle button over here so that when I'm on the edit page, I'm only seeing a single viewer. We're not doing too much in the timeline, so I can make this smaller, and I can close the media pool just so we're here. So this is the edit page. Fusion, if you haven't been into it before, is available in the lower bar right here as a number of our pages here. So something that's different about Fusion is it is mostly about working on a single shot, which is different from most of the other pages here that we have in DaVinci Resolve. The cut page is we're working on a timeline. Edit page, we're working on a timeline. Color page, if you're familiar with it, technically you view one shot at a time, but if I have this timeline open, I can still see things in context of my timeline. Same with Fairlight. There's no audio in this project, but I am viewing a timeline, whereas Fusion doesn't have a timeline view, and it's really only about looking at this one shot and what I want to do with it. So that tends to be correspond to the workflow of working on VFX. It's just one shot at a time. Technically, I can view other clips in my timeline down here if I want to switch between them, but we won't be doing too much of that today. So let's talk about getting into Fusion. When we have existing media in our timeline, you can hover your playhead over the clip you want to work with and click on this button for Fusion at the bottom and click on it, and that will open that clip in Fusion. You can also, I'm going to switch back to the edit page, either clicking here or I can use my keyboard shortcut Shift 4, the number 4. I can also right click on my media in the timeline and open clip in Fusion, or open in Fusion page. So I can click on that, brings me to the same place. And you can also, let's go back to the edit page. You can switch into Fusion. It's the same as clicking this here with a keyboard shortcut of Shift and the number 5. So plenty of ways to get into Fusion. I tend to use keyboard shortcuts so that it's fairly quick for me. So I'll just shift between or use Shift 4, go to the edit page, Shift 5 to go into Fusion. Shift 6 is color, Shift 7 is Fairlight, Shift 8 is deliver. And those should be here as well. So switching to pages, workspace, switch to page, it will show you the shortcut here in the menu. I see Aaron has a good question here. Will you talk about color space? So I do want to touch on color management a little bit tomorrow. I did see someone else saying, oh yeah, Stephen saying, first impulse is that media needs a bit of color work. And that is true. This is actually Blackmagic film, like the very first color, like this was shot on, I think, the original Blackmagic Pocket many years ago. So it's technically in a log space. The manual that we're using doesn't really cover dealing with that in this lesson. So we won't do that today, but I do want to touch on it tomorrow because it can be a part of your VFX workflow. But I don't want to get to it just yet. I want to make sure we're focusing on the few things of covering putting elements together, merging them together, some basic compositing, and then we'll get to some color management sorts of things, so that for future projects you have an idea of how to deal with that. So again, if you're new to getting into Fusion, the ways I can do that are being on my edit page or anywhere in Resolve on the timeline, and wherever my playhead is, if I click on Fusion, it will open that. Same thing, same behavior with Shift and the number 5, or I can right click and choose Open in Fusion page. That I tend to just use the keyboard shortcut or click at the bottom here, but if you have multiple things on the timeline, like if I just do this and I have, a couple different versions going on here, and I want to make sure that, if, for example, here, there's technically 2 clips that are active underneath my playhead, and to make sure that I open the one I want, I can right click, select it, right click, and open a Fusion page so I get that correct one. But we're here. I'll hit Shift 5 and we're in Fusion. And let's go here. Let's go over the interface in Fusion, because this is fairly different than most other things in Resolve, as well as other NLEs, video editing apps, things like that. We're used to seeing a timeline, we're used to seeing some viewers and various other tools. Some of these are consistent between pages in DaVinci Resolve. For example, in the upper left here, I have a media pool So I can open that, and that will open and close this panel here, and I can see all of the media, the timelines, anything that I have in my project. There is an inspector, which is the same sort of panel, same sort of placement as in other Resolve pages. And when I click on that, it will actually correspond and change based on what node I have active. So I have tools to adjust the preferences of the node I'm working on. There's a metadata panel, which I don't think I ever really use in Fusion. That tends to be more when I'm doing editorial type tasks, but sometimes it's useful. But it's there. It's in all your pages here in Resolve. If you need to see details of a clip, it will show you things like time code and number of frames and where the media is and what type it is. Things like that. We have a clips panel jumping over here to the upper left. So this, again, similar to the color page where we can see the clips in our timeline and switch between them. We currently only have one clip in our timeline, so we are only seeing one in there. So we can go ahead and keep it closed for now. We have this effects panel. So this edit page has an effects panel where you can add various things. This one is similar in that it has a lot of things you can add, but it's different in that the contents include every possible tool we can use in Fusion, which is not just the effects on the edit page, but it is a lot of nodes and tools we can use for our shot. I'll cover that in more detail shortly. We have a spline panel and a keyframes panel, and these are somewhat similar in that they're mostly for animation purposes. So if I want to have a parameter change over time, this is keyframes are similar on the color page and the edit page where you have something change over time. We have a lot more control over that here, and we'll get into this a little bit today, more so tomorrow. But if you want to change something over time, you can animate it in keyframes, and then you have control over essentially the shape of that animation or how fast that animation happens. Or if it's going between different values, you can control that with fine detail here. But we'll get to that later. And while you're looking at it, you may not see this picture in your project. So I can right click on any node, and I have a section here that is show tile picture. So I can check or uncheck that. And that is controls a single node. So on this one, for example, there's nothing there. I can right click on it, and I can click show tile picture. And currently there's nothing there because it's not cached yet, but that will open this up. So that is controlling a single node. I can also control that for all nodes in this project. I can right click in my node area, and this is currently active, force source tile pictures. So any media in node, it's currently active to select this. So any media in node, it's making sure that that is there. If I undo that, and then I undo this one here, that will go away. I think it's a good idea, especially if you're working on a composition that has a lot of different media ins, a lot of different elements, and you want to visually keep track of what's what. It's nice to have that. So for now, I'm going to right click in my nodes area and have force source tile pictures active. And currently that is only being applied to this composition here. I do have an option in Fusion settings, and in Flow. So again, that is Fusion settings, Flow, and there's this checkbox here to force source tile pictures or all tile pictures, and that will be for every node. I tend not to want to use that, but you can have it so that every time for every clip that you open in Fusion, you can force source tile pictures, so that will always be active. That is a preference. It's up to you. You can use it, you cannot. There's a lot of different things you can do, and these are some of the things you can do to bend Fusion to your will so that it shows you what you want. So I'll have that there for now. Let's talk about nodes. So this section at the bottom here, this is our node editor in Fusion. And if you're familiar with the color page, you'll know that nodes are there too, but nodes work differently here. On the color page, let me actually switch to that. We'll be on the color page here. And so I've got a node editor here in the color page. If I add a new node, I can hit Option S on my keyboard, or I can right click here and add a node. These nodes on the color page are basically empty boxes. Every time I add one, nothing happens. These nodes are containers that any adjustment can be applied to. So if I have this node selected and I start adjusting gain, that adjustment has been added to this node. And then if I go over here and change contrast, the contrast adjustment has been added to this node. We'll delete that and we'll switch back to Fusion. In Fusion, each node is its own tool. They're not blank containers, but rather they are their own tools. So I can add a node to here. So I have a color corrector node currently, and that is not, I can't, if I was trying to add a blur like you could in color, I can't add a blur to a color corrector. I can only do these color correction controls. So change the gain and things like that. If I want to add a blur, I need to add a blur, and now I have controls for that, and I can adjust my settings there. I'll go into how I added those nodes in just a moment, but let's talk about how things are operating here with the nodes. So I have a media in, which is coming from the timeline. So whatever's on the timeline, that is the media in here. Our processing will happen between the media in and media out, and then anything that goes into the media out will be shown on the edit page. So I'm going to, I have a toolbar here with a bunch of nodes in it. So there's this drop that is a blur. I'm going to click and drag it into my, like onto this line, this pipe, and I've added a blur. And if I go to my inspector, I can make this blurry. You can see my image is blurry. And if I switch back to the edit page, you can see now I've made my clip blurry. So anything that goes into the media out is going into or back to the edit page and will show up in my exports. Now let's talk about how the viewers are working here, because this is also different than other areas in Resolve. In most editing apps and LEs, as well as Resolve on the edit page, you sometimes will see the two viewers, which tends to correspond to a source and timeline viewer. So the left one will be the source, your clip, and the right viewer will be viewing the timeline. That is not the case with the viewers here in Fusion. Let me reset these. So these two viewers here can be set to show absolutely anything you want and any part of the process. So I'm going to click on my media in one over here, and you'll notice, let me zoom in on this a bit. You can see there's these two dots underneath the node there. Those correspond to which viewer that is shown in. Currently, they're both black because there's nothing in a viewer. But if I click on my media in node and I hit the number 1 on my keyboard, you can see that turns white. It is active because that node is now active in viewer number 1. Click on this again. I can hit number 2 on my keyboard, and now this node has 2 white dots because it is both in viewer number 1 and viewer number 2. So I can view the same thing on 2 different viewers, but I can also see each node, so anywhere in my process in the viewers. I'm going to reset my viewers by clicking on the tilde key that is above tab on the left side of my keyboard. And again, I'll click on media in 1. I can hit 1 on my keyboard, and that will show up over here. And now to see what the blur is doing, I can actually set the output of media out to viewer number 2. So now you'll see I'm seeing 2 different images because I'm seeing media in 1 over here, viewer number 1, and that is the image in its original state. And then the image is going into this blur node. We've done our blur effect, and then media out, the output of that, is being shown in viewer number 2. So I can see how things work, or how things are in their original state, or any other part of the process if I need to, and then also the final output. This is great if you are dealing with complex things and you only want to see, let's say, you can be looking at the final output, and then you could be looking at a different element and what you're doing to that. But it's up to you of how you use it. You can also click on, there's this rectangle icon next to each viewer. If I click that, that will make it so there's only one viewer. So let me go to viewer number 1. I'll click this rectangle icon, and now I'll hit 1 on my media in 1, and I only have the one viewer. If you're doing anything complex and you just want to focus, it's a good idea to have that so you only have the one thing open. Now I can click on media out, hit 1 on my keyboard, and I'm only viewing that one item. Keeps things simple. And if you ever need to get back to the 2 viewer view, you have, now these are 2 rectangles. I can click that, and my 2 viewers come back. So again, processing is media in, that is our original media. It goes into a node or any number of nodes, and then that goes to media out. Let's talk about adding nodes and connecting them, and we'll get to, we'll be able to move on to working on this shot and a couple other workflow tips for working in Fusion. So adding nodes, adding effects. There are many different ways to do it. We have this toolbar right here that has some commonly used nodes. So if you hover over some of them, I can see what they are. This is a background. I can go over here. This is text. I can see a color curves thing. There's a little tooltip that comes up to show me what this is. I can also go to my effects panel and browse in here. I see this tools folder and has a bunch of things in there. There are nearly 300 nodes on this list, so don't feel the need to memorize or try all of them just yet, especially if you're new. There are a few that are going to be more useful than others as you're getting started, but you can find the things you're looking for in here. So if I click on tools, I can click on this search icon and type blur, and I have about 20 different options for different types of blurs in here. So one way to add a node, the way that I did before, is dragging from the toolbar. So I can click on blur, I'm clicking and holding, and I'm dragging onto this pipe, and you can see that as I do that, it's turning blue. If I let go, it's now a part of this pipeline. So if I move this around a little bit, you can see that the media in is connected to this yellow triangle, and then this white square is then connected to media out. You can also connect things manually. So I'm going to click my blur icon here. I'm just going to drag it over here. And if I click on my pipeline here, I can disconnect that. And let's connect these manually. So this is a flow chart, essentially, of what what is happening here. Things are connected, one's connected to another. It's flowing from one to another. You can think of it like a stream where this bucket of water is pouring into this bucket of water, and then that gets poured into this, if that helps. Every node has an output, which is this square here, usually, or it's almost always by default on the right side. So this square is an output, and it is connected to a triangle, which is an input. So in this case, I want to connect the media in output, and I can just click and drag it to the yellow triangle on my blur, and then I can connect the output of the blur to the media out. If I don't do that, and switch back to my edit page, you can see that it is black. And it also gives me this little message here, no frame available for media out 1. That's because I haven't told Fusion to send anything back to the edit page to my viewer here. So hitting Shift 5, back to Fusion. Media in is connected to blur, but blur is not connected to anything. That's why I was getting that error. So now I click on the output, connected to media out, and I see it in my viewer here. That viewer is on viewer number 2. And if I go back to the edit page, you can see now I see my image. Everything is connected. And I'm happy. Great. Back to Fusion. So that's one way to add a node. So we have our toolbar here, and that's one way to do it. We also have the effects panel, as I said before, but the way that I tend to do things, and I think is the quickest way, is click on a current node. Whatever we add now will happen immediately after the node that is currently selected. So again, selecting media in 1, and now on your keyboard, hit Shift and space. And that will bring up a tool selector dialog box. Again, I've selected a node, Shift space on my keyboard, and I just type in what I want. So if I want to blur, I type in blur. It gives me my options. I'm going to choose this first one. I click add, and it's been added there. If you don't have your node selected, it's actually just going to add wherever you last clicked. So if I click up here, Shift space, blur, hit enter, it adds it right here. And then you can connect things manually as we did before. Panelists, how are we doing on questions?
We're doing great. We're doing great. There was a question about how to be able to show the thumbnail in the media in.
Oh, yeah. So to review, there are multiple preferences that we did. So to control a single node, let's say I want to do this on my blur node, I can right click on the node, go to show tile picture. Right click, show tile picture, and it will show something here. If I'm just seeing an icon here right now, just because it hasn't been loaded into the viewer. So if I load that into the viewer and it starts to cache, like if I scrub through the timeline, then it will show me the thumbnail of whatever the output of that node is. If I don't want that on that node, I can just right click again, show, and uncheck show tile picture. You can also force tile pictures within just this shot. So right click, and then I can force active tile picture, which will show the tile for the thumbnail for the currently selected node. Force source, I feel like is the only one I tend to use, which only does it for media in nodes or any, graphic or anything like that that's in there. And you can also force mask tile pictures, which we'll get to later, of creating masks. And then there was the option of Fusion settings, flow, and you can select this for all of Fusion for all projects, active tile pictures or only source tile pictures, and you have a few preferences up there. While we're talking about Fusion settings, let me come to another one that I like to share. There is on this same page here, there's these two things, and let me set this back to default. There's these pipe grab distance setting and a link grab distance. This is especially useful. No, this is just useful for everyone. This setting means how close can I be to, this output to grab it. If the setting is low, I have to be exactly on this and click and drag. And then also same with like how close do I need to be to the pipe to be able to grab it. If I go to Fusion settings, flow, pipe grab distance, and I just drag it all the way up, and link grab distance, drag it all the way up. Now I don't have to be so close. You can see if I'm like 20 pixels away and I click, and I still grab that, and I'm able to go there. This is great just if you've scrolled out, if these are small, if you're trying to work fast, having to go and go, oh, let me be exactly on it and grab that. It just takes extra time. If you're working quickly, you don't want to have to go back and, oh, didn't get it, didn't get it, didn't get it, got it, and now you drag it over. So I highly recommend playing with that setting, Fusion settings, flow, pipe grab, and link grab distance. I keep it at the maximum just because I feel like it's faster for me. And that's that. And since I'm doing it, let's talk about scrolling and resizing things. As I'm working around my node area, you can see that I'm dragging things around. I'm using a three button mouse. This right here, this is the Logitech MX Master 3 series. It's got a scroll wheel and multiple buttons. Actually has several buttons. Highly recommend getting a 3-button mouse if you use a mouse and you're in Resolve. There's a lot of great uses for it. One big one is just being able to click with the middle scroll wheel and drag around my node area. I can also do the same thing in my viewers. So click with the middle wheel, scroll around. So I can do those things, and that way I can resize, or I can drag around, and then I resize both my viewers and the node area by hitting Command on my Mac or Control on your Windows and scrolling the middle scroll wheel, and now I can change the size of my nodes, or same thing, change the size of the viewer. So if I need to do intense detail work and I'm doing something over here, I can scroll in and see exactly where I'm clicking and then scroll out again. I can also reset the size of this. So if I am in the node area, make sure you have clicked in the node area and I hit Command 1, it will go back to the regular size. Command 1 on a Mac, Control 1 on Windows. For my viewers, if I hit Command 1, it's actually scrolling, resizing to 100%. So this media is 1920 by 1080, so it's showing me 1920 by 1080 on my monitor, not necessarily fitting to the screen. If I hit, so that's Command or Control 1, I can hit Command or Control 2, and that's 200%, as we can see right over here. So now it's 200% the size of the media. And I can also use Command or Control F, Command on Mac, Control on Windows, to, if I have this viewer selected, hit Command F, and that fits my media to the size of the window. If I do that, that also means I can resize. I'm just dragging this black line above my toolbar and resizing the viewer. And when I do that, if I hit Fit to Window, then it's going to resize that image to fill my viewer. And if I do that, click on viewer number 2, hit Command F, now both of them will do that. Cool. All right, let's do a few concepts before we work on this shot. I'm going to, if I want to to remove a node, I can just click on it and hit delete. So I have this blur node, delete, and it's out of there. So let's talk about compositing and some operations that we'll be doing. We'll then apply this to this shot, but I want to just give you a theoretical example. You don't need to follow along for this. I just want to show this as a concept first. So I'm going to grab a background node, have this background. I can hit 1 on my keyboard, view it in there. It is a black background. I can edit that by going to Inspector. I have tools based on this background. Let's give it a color. Make it, that's bright. Let's do this kind of bright yellow. Is that hurting anyone's eyes? Let's maybe make it a darker orange. All right, so we have, let me clear all my viewers with the tilde key, hit 1 on the keyboard, and there we go. I've got a background. So this is actually a useful node to use if you're doing motion graphics or you need a solid color for anything. That's what this is for. And let me add another background. And I'll click on that. And let's give this one a different color. So let's say some kind of green here. And you'll see that nothing is happening on the screen. That is because, yes, you guessed it, this node is not in the viewer. You can see my background 1 has a dot under here, so meaning it's in viewer number 1. There's no dot active on background number 2. So if I click on it and hit 2 on my keyboard, now I have my green background here. So these are 2 color backgrounds just floating around in space. And let's say I want to put them together. Generally, what we're doing in Fusion is merging things together. We're putting one thing over another. And to make this a little bit easier to follow, I'm just going to, I'll come back to what I have done later, but I will now have a solid background here and a green circle, just so that when we put one over the other, we can see how they go together. And you can see I have this checkered underlay here, which shows that these are transparent pixels. So I've got a yellow-orange background and a green circle. Now, the main option in compositing of sticking things together is merging. And we have a node for that called merge. You can find it, actually, just by grabbing it from our toolbar here, or like we showed before, shift space and searching for it. I can just type merge, and there it is. I click add. Now, again, nothing is connected, so let's take the background here, background number 1, and I'm going to view my merge, and let's just do one viewer. So I'll view the merge in number 1. So currently there's a background, that's my yellow background, and it's going into the merge, into the yellow input here. Yellow input is background. Now, if I want to put this on top and combine the images, I can take the output of background number 2, my green circle, and then I'm going to put that into the green triangle on my merge. And immediately you see that I've got a green circle on top of my yellow background. What the merge is doing is just saying, hey, whatever's going in the background, put that on bottom. Whatever's going into the green, put that on top. You've effectively created something similar to a layer, like in Photoshop or other image things, or even on your edit timeline. If you put something on track 1, it's on bottom, and you put something on track 2, it is on, it goes above. In this case, we're sort of simulating that behavior by piping things through a merge, and we put one over another. I see, Benjamin, your question, did I use a keyboard command to clear out both monitors at once? Yes. So if I have 2 things open, I can actually clear my monitor, my viewers, and I hit the tilde key, which is above the tab key, and that clears out my viewers. So it resets all nodes so they're not going into viewers. And then I have just viewer 1 selected, so I only have one viewer. And now I'm on my merge, and I hit 1 on the keyboard, and there we go. And yes, harsh. I see yellow is background and green is foreground, question mark? Yes. So the merge, let me disconnect these and just go back to the merge node. You see there are, we've already talked about the output, so this square, anything that comes out of that, I can put somewhere else. When we were looking at our blur, we only saw one yellow triangle as an input, but now we have more triangles. We have a yellow triangle, and if I hover over it, you can see right there, it says merge1 dot background. So the node is merge1, and the input right here is the background. So that anything that goes in there is the background of the merge. That is the background input. And if I hover over this green triangle right here, I see merge1 dot foreground. So that is a foreground. So if you don't remember which is which, you can hover over it and it will tell you. Fusion defaults to background as the default. So I don't have to be too accurate if I know that, if I remember that. So if I grab the background of my orange background over here and I just haphazardly hold it over the merge and I let go, it will connect it to the background. So again, the background is the default input from most things. So you can just click and drag and it's over there. That also means that it's a good idea to do background first. If I click and drag on this and I'm not too accurate and I just hold it over here, that's connected my green circle to my merge, and that's now the background. So now, if I do that again with my orange and hover over the merge, the next input it's going to use is the foreground. So now I have the opposite of what I want. My orange background, or my orange square here, rectangle here, is now on top of the circle. So I can't see the circle because that is in the background. So these are flipped. They are the wrong way around. And if I've done that, it's not the end of the world because I could disconnect things manually and reconnect to them and just be careful about my inputs. Or I can right click on merge and I have this option here, swap inputs. And you can also see there's this keyboard shortcut, Command T for me on a Mac, or for you on Windows, if you're on Windows, that would be Control T. So let me click on this. I'll hit Command T on my keyboard, and that has swapped the inputs. You can see this green circle is now going into the green input, and my background here is going into the orange background. The way I remembered that when I was just getting started is I made just a little, not quite mnemonic, but memory device is that, you know, I'm in a desert and the ground, the sand is yellow and there's a tree growing out of it and the tree is green. So the background underneath the sand is yellow, is orange, and then the plants, they go above it and it's green. And it sounds silly and it is, but you know what? It worked for me. So if it works for you, good. Whatever helps. And I also did see someone ask, what is this blue circle? As I've now covered it up. So every merge has these three inputs. We've got a background, we've got a foreground, so that goes on top. Let's hover over it and find out what it says. So I see that it says merge1 dot effect mask. An effect mask is a mask for this effect. A mask is effectively a black and white image of or something that is black and white pixels. We'll get to this with VFX, but the idea is it identifies the parts of the image that the effect we're doing applies to. So this merge is what it's doing. It has a background input, but the merge is ultimately about adding this foreground to the top. And let's say I want to limit this merge. I only want it to merge the foreground within, let's say, a rectangle. So I've got this rectangle mask in my toolbar. And if I just put this in my viewer, you can see this rectangle on screen here. This is a black and white image. It's just saying white pixels, let things come through. Black pixels, stop. It's white is yes, black is no. Mathematically, it's black is 0, white is 1. So let me go back to my merge here. And if I have that rectangle and I connect it to my effect mask, what I'm doing is saying only do this effect within the confines of my rectangle mask. So let me do that. And you can see suddenly that circle has only been composited, has only been added, has only been merged within the bounds of that rectangle. So again, that shape has gone into the blue triangle and it's there. Let's take a look at that in context of our footage. Again, you don't need to be following along with this directly. This is more about concepts that we'll go into with our footage later. So let's talk about that blur node we did before. Let me do that slowly. So I clicked on media in 1, I hit shift space on my keyboard, I typed in blur, and I clicked on add, or I hit enter on my keyboard, and it adds that blur node. So we're not merging things anymore, but if I view, let's view the blur here in my inspector, or in my viewer, and I have blur open in the inspector, I can increase the blur size, and you can see I'm blurring the image. Now with my blue triangle, I actually want to say, hey, let me limit this effect to a certain area of my image. So now, let's say I can add a circle, this ellipse mask here that's in my toolbar. I have some controls here in the circle. I'll leave it by default to the default for now. And if I connect the output of that ellipse node, put it into the blue triangle of the blur node, you can now see that only inside the circle is blurry. So we've got a background input. So the blur only has the background input because it's just expecting one thing to go in it. And then we have a blue triangle for the effect mask, so we can limit the effect within that mask. So ultimately, most of what we're doing in Fusion is a background, putting something on top, merging it. So we have a foreground, and then occasionally limiting an effect with a mask that may go into a blue input. That's compositing in a nutshell. There's a lot more we can do, but those are pretty much the basics. One thing over another thing, and then limit it if we want, and then add something else. While we're here, as you start dealing with, you can visually deal with, connecting things manually here. But as some nodes have many different inputs and you don't want to deal with remembering what everything is, you can actually manually choose that as you drag things over. So instead of left clicking the default click and dragging over the merge, and that went into the background input, I can right click on my output here and then drag that over to my node and then release, and it's given me this little menu right here. So it's showing me all of the inputs, and now I can choose which one I want to use. So this one, I can choose background. Let me right click on this rectangle here and then release, and I say that's the effect mask. And then I can right click on that output there, drag it over my merge and release, and now select foreground. So if you don't remember what these are, and you don't want to hover over to check, or you just have a lot of inputs and it's faster that way, just right click on an output, drag it over here, and select whichever input you want to use. How's everyone doing? Any questions we should talk about live here?
Yeah, I just have one here that I'm trying to figure out what is happening. If you can just repeat what are the options? Why media in node, it's not showing up in the viewer.
Not showing up in the viewer. If you could be a couple different things. If you only have one viewer active, so currently only have one viewer active right here, which in my case is viewer number 1. If I click on it and I hit number 2 on my keyboard, I'm not going to see anything because I don't have viewer number 2 open. So I have to hit 1 on my keyboard for it to go here. If I did the opposite and I only have viewer number 2 active, so now I've maximized viewer number 2 by hitting this on viewer number 2, and I hit viewer number 1 on this. Again, nothing will show up because I only have viewer number 2 active. So I need to hit 2 on my keyboard. So that's one possibility. Other possibilities is that you've disconnected that media in and have something else viewed. There might be no connection there. It could be that your media is not linked in the Resolve project.
Yeah, I also have here Marine. He is having, oh, he or she, sorry. He's getting a checkerboard instead of the image in media in one. You have any idea?
Checkerboard.
Like the transparent information, but I really don't know
Yeah.
how this happened. Sorry.
Make sure, just to kind of go back to the beginning, is make sure that you're in your timeline on the edit page and your playhead is over this piece of media, and then you go into Fusion. If you had something else, then the media in might not show up. Um, Hard to say without seeing the interface. So I don't know
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm gonna ask here for a screenshot, and I'll get back to you if I can make it work here. Okay.
Great. Let's see. Scene from timeline won't show in the Fusion page. I see someone else was having a similar thing. Oh, Matt had a good question. I accidentally deleted my media out node. How do I get it back? Here's one thing you can do. Command Z on a Mac, Control Z on Windows is undo or edit, undo, and you can usually go back a few steps and undo a few things. So that is one possibility. The other is, being on here, shift space, type in media out, and adding it back manually. And now, assuming I have everything connected, go back to my edit page, and everything is going into the media out properly and should be working. So that is one possibility. A lot of what happens in Fusion is, because there's a lot of things to keep track of, things may go wrong. So being able to solve things like that is important. And I do it all the time. It's not, it happens. Things happen. So Command or Control Z to undo, re-adding nodes manually. And again, if you need to add any node, you can add from the toolbar, you can add from effects. I tend to use the dialog box, hitting Shift Space on the keyboard, bringing up this box, and then you can just type in what you want. So merge or blur or whatever it is you want, and then clicking add. What else? I see a few more questions coming in. Same thing. Richard was asking if you deleted the media in node. Same thing. I can add in a media in manually from here. So generally, I'd say undo is your friend, if anything goes wrong, but you can add things manually if you need. And let's also do a couple more interface things, and then we'll take a quick break. I know some people, for those of you who are more advanced, you may be bored. For those of you who are totally new, your head is swimming, and we'll try to be somewhere in the middle for most of you. But we'll review everything as we go as well. So if you're not getting it now, it's okay. Don't lose hope. I've been using Fusion for maybe 8 years now, and I'm still learning things, and I still make mistakes, and I still use undo a lot. So it's okay. We'll get through it. You're starting a long, rewarding journey. Um, and yeah, keep it slow. We'll keep it logical and add on as we go. All right, so as I've been navigating around, you may notice that there's this little navigator here, and you can see that it actually corresponds to what my nodes are. So I can see there's a media in, that looks like a media in. This is my blur, that's the media out, and then I have my other nodes up here. And there's this box that shows what's currently active in my node area. So as I middle mouse wheel scroll around, you can see it's going in here. This is great if you have a rather large node flow going on. So I can, just go over here and actually click over and scroll around that way. If by default, if all my nodes are on screen, that will not be there. So let me zoom out on all my nodes. And there's a setting here. It's options. Yeah, show navigator. So I've right-clicked in my node area, right-click here, and options, show navigator. And you can also see there's this keyboard shortcut for V. So if I want that to go away, I hit V on my keyboard, the letter V. And there's also options. There's this, I can select auto navigator, which means that if all of my nodes are on screen, it will not be there. And as I start going into either zooming in or just have a large node flow that has many nodes in it, then it will show up. So it auto appears as necessary. Again, that is right click in my node editor, options, and then I have show navigator and auto navigator. These two right here. So can be either way. Again, it's a preference, up to you how you deal with it. Let's see, Harsh is asking if I have multiple media out nodes, which will show up on the timeline. Good question. So by default, today we're only dealing with one media in and one media out, but we can add multiple media outs. The reason for that may be multiple layers. You can send different outputs to different places. Like you can send a different image through a different media out to the color page. We won't deal with that today, but I can show it off later this week. But media out 1 is going to be the one that goes to the edit page, with the caveat being that index, like if you click on it and you look in your inspector, index should be 0. If I add another media out, I have media out 2, and I click on it, I can see that this says index 1. Basically, it starts at 0. Each new one you add has a new index number. Where that's used, again, we'll talk about in the future, but make sure whatever the default one is will work out of the box. So it will be media out one and it will say index zero. So if you start having multiple ones that you're connecting and stuff like that, just make sure the original one that is media out one, index zero is showing up. If you're not dealing with multiple media outs, then don't worry about that at all. We're not going to cover that in detail today. If you open up a clip in Fusion, a piece of footage, it will have media in one and media out one, and you can just work with those and it will work. All right. There is more questions than I see, and I think some of them are related to the things we'll be doing next. So let's take a break. Let's say 15 minutes. Put a little timer on screen here, and we'll go into doing some compositing again. Welcome back. Come back from your kitchens. You can keep your cup of coffee handy. Hope everyone had a good break. Let's get into some more fusioning. Hopefully not confusion. And if you are confused, that's okay. We'll review and we'll get into some more adjustments and principles and putting this into play with the lesson of the media we've got. And if you are just joined or joined recently and missed some of the things at the beginning, hi, I'm Gadali. Chris is with me. Noel is with me. We're learning Fusion within DaVinci Resolve. We're having a great time. And I hope someone in the chat can back me up on that. If you're not having a great time, don't tell me. Great. Going well. Very great. No doubt about it. Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad you're having a great time, or at least making me feel better that you are. Yeah, time of my life. Excellent. Good. Okay. We'll dive into more of the lesson, putting these things together. We have our media. We've got the things in this project. If you hadn't downloaded the project, there are links in the chat. Adding the DRA, opening that up. So we've got our media here that we're working with. And we're going to start again from scratch. So if you were following along before, cool, we'll start again with a blank slate. If you weren't following along or aren't, that's okay. Just watch and learn, especially if you're new. I want to make sure you are just getting some a grasp of these concepts, and then you can put it into practice on your own later, if you so choose. Again, things are in the Fusion, the Guide to Visual Effects, available on the DaVinci Resolve training page. Links are in the chat. I believe panelists will put that back in there again if you haven't seen it already. And a couple things before we dive back in. Some of you have already grasped this, but while I am speaking in English, our panelists are able to answer questions in a few other languages. So both Cristiano and Noel can answer questions in Spanish. Ambos hablan español. Cristiano also speaks Portuguese, so feel free to ask questions there. Fala português? How'd I do, Chris? And then, okay, and then Noel also parla l'italiano. Yes?
Sí.
Great. So if you have questions in English, Spanish, Portuguese, or Italian, feel free. You can ask questions in other languages, but no guarantee that they will be answered in those languages.
Un peu de français, je comprends tout,
Ah,
mais
parlez-vous
je
français? Très bien.
parler comme ci, comme ça.
Great. Klingon. Ooh, no. But not that I know of. Ooh, Esperanto. Be fun. We can do black magic trainings in Esperanto. Um, and there are, for those of you that speak Spanish or Portuguese, there are trainings in those languages as well. So feel free to, I believe the links have been shared in the chat and they may be shared again. There are other trainings in those languages. Oh, Sir Jack. 日本語が少し話します。But thanks for asking. All right. And I saw some questions in here of, let's see, that might be good to chat about. For someone was asking about control surfaces and keyboards. Uh, there are multiple color grading panels for DaVinci Resolve. There's a Fairlight panel and things like that. Speed editor and other things like that. Editing keyboard. All of those are useful, but for Fusion, uh, they're not really designed for that. Edit keyboard is for editing, cut pages. The speed editor is for the cut page and editing. So, it may be helpful to have a jog wheel, but color panel isn't going to do much on the Fusion page. So, not with what we're covering today, but if you do have questions about that, panelists may be able to answer as well. Also, would love to know, just as we go, especially for what we're covering in the next couple of days, your experience level with some of this. So, would love to know in the chat as you're coming back, have what is your experience level in Fusion? Are you learning it as an editor just to add a few effects to your arsenal? Are you a colorist? Have you used other motion graphics, VFX, or compositing apps before? Feel free to drop that in the chat. Would love to know just a little bit about kind of what knowledge you're bringing to this, and I'll see if I can adapt slightly based on your responses. Oh, shake. All right, you're advanced. Flame. Okay, cool. So we've got some After Effects. Yeah, new to Fusion. Nodes are new. No real VFX experience. Colorist. Okay, cool. Excellent. Yes. So zero knowledge. Okay. Yeah, so we have a mix of experience here, and so feel free to ask more advanced questions, if you are coming from Nuke and want to know sort of how things translate between them. I'll try to answer some of those as well. And of course, we're gearing this towards people who are totally new, but if you do have some of those questions, I can pepper in some of that knowledge as we go. All right. Let's talk about this shot that we have to work with today. So we have some effects on there. I'm going to drag this background in from my media pool just so I'm starting with a blank slate to work on this shot. You'll notice that as I did that, I brought it in. The first one we were working on has this little 3-star icon on the clip, which shows me that there is a Fusion comp in there. There are nodes that are doing something. Whereas the one that I just grabbed does not have that, which means it's blank. So if I open this one up, Shift 5, I can see all my nodes. And I go to this one, Shift 5, nothing, blank slate. So let's work in here. And Noel has just posted the list of the next training session. So if you want to come back for the advanced Fusion stuff, if you want to learn color, Fairlight, editing, or other languages, those are all in there. So come back. Here we go. So we've got a shot. We're looking at our media in, we've got our media out. Inspector is open for now. Let me close that. And we're just looking at our shot. So we're dealing with viewers. If you have two viewers open, we've got both of those here. I'm going to select this rectangle on viewer number 1, just so I only have one viewer active. And if I click on media in 1, hit 1 on my keyboard, I now see the shot we're working on in my viewer. And that's it. We're going to start bringing in other items to work on. We don't have to have those in our edit timeline. We can bring them directly in from the media pool. So in our media pool, in the media folder, we already have this background, this piece of footage we're working on. We don't need to do anything with that, but we have this drive doc piece of footage. We can also call it a plate. In the VFX world, we tend to call pieces of footage or images plates. This comes from the film days of when things were projected onto film plates. And it's just a common VFX term of it just means footage. But I may say plate because that's in VFX work what we tend to refer to things as. So I have a background plate. I have this foreground or CG plate. And so I grabbed the drive dock, I dragged it into my node area, and now I can close my media pool. And if I want to see what that is, I can click on it, click 1 on my keyboard, scrub through, and you can see some stuff is going on. Let's actually just look at our shots and see what this is. So if I go back to media in 1 and I look at it and I scrub through, you can see this is from a short film, and this character guy right here is supposed to be some kind of robot, and there's a man who is putting a hard drive into the guy. And this CG plate, this piece of footage that was rendered from 3D, is, if we look at it, showing his back area opening up and then revealing some docking ports that the hard drive will be insert in. So before we start merging things together, let's get a little organized and rename some things. So right now this is just called media in 1 and media in 2, and that's fine if we only have 2 things to deal with. But once you start getting into more complex comps and having complicated node trees, it's good to be able to see exactly what things are and name them so you remember, especially if you don't have these thumbnails active. So I can click on media in 1, I can right click on it and hit rename. Also, you can see there's a shortcut, keyboard shortcut there too. So I'm going to actually just press that and hit F2 on my keyboard. If you're on a Mac, you may need to hit function F2 depending on how your keyboard is set up. So let's do that. And I'm going to rename this to background plate, just so I know that that's our background or piece of footage. I'm going to click on this one right here, media in 2, and I can right click on it and hit rename, or F2 or function F2, and let's call that drive doc. Okay. Now let's view the media out in viewer number 1, and we can see nothing is happening. I'm just viewing my background plate. Why? I haven't merged it. Now, if we inspect our drive doc, hit 1 on the keyboard, I can see that I have this checkered background here, and I can see that these pixels are transparent. So if I merge drive doc over background plate, it should just show up on top. Now, before we talked about adding a merge node manually, connecting those together, but there is a shortcut that helps us merge faster. Let's do it. If I grab the output of drive doc, so this is the thing that I want on top, my foreground. I grab the output of my foreground and I drag that over the output of my background and release. It has created this merge node. So again, let's grab the output of the drive dock, drag that on top of the output, that is the square here of my background plate, and I release, and that creates a merge node. And assuming I did it in that order, I have drive dock going into the foreground, that is the green input of my merge, and the background plate is going into the background, the yellow input, background input of the merge. So now I have the drive dock composited on top of, merged on top of my background. So if I view the media out, now we can see this drive dock, the CG is working. I can see it, and these things are put together. And we're done. Our VFX are perfect. Well done. You're a VFX artist now. Congratulations. That's all there is to it. But we can do more. We will do more. We're not done yet. Oh, yes. And Ren was asking, how do I enable seeing the transparent background? Usually that's there by default. So you should see a checker underlay here. There is an option in your three-dot menu in the viewer that's in the upper right corner of a viewer. Click these three dots. And there's this preference here called checker underlay, and that's currently checked. If it is unchecked, I will see a black background. So that is useful if you don't want to see the checker background, if you want to look at edge detail and just make sure you're not distracted by multiple colors in the background there. I may toggle between those when I'm doing work, but I will usually have checker underlay active. So three-dot menu, check checker underlay, and have that checkbox there, just so I'm positive and I can see that that is indeed a transparent background. Now, if I was merging these things and let's say I did this in reverse order, where I grabbed background plate output and put that onto the drive dock, I've created a merge, but now my background is going into the foreground and my foreground is going into the background. We did have a fix for that. So you can right click on this merge and click swap inputs, or use the shortcut Command T on a Mac or Control T on Windows. So if I'm viewing that, you can currently see I'm not seeing things in the right order because the background is on top. So I'll hit Command T and it swaps, and now I can see, and if I scrub through, that is now correct. And I will connect my merge to my media out, so the results are going to the edit page. And as you go, you can also just view the media out in your viewer by selecting it, hitting 1 on the keyboard, and that way I'm always seeing my final output in my viewer. If you'd like, you can have two viewers open and view my media out in viewer number 2, for example, and just view the drive dock in viewer number 1, or just the background plate, depending on what you're doing. My preference for most things is just to keep viewer number 1 active and only look at one thing at a time, unless I need to be referencing multiple things at the same time. So up to you. For simplicity's sake, let's keep it to one viewer for now. So I'm going up here to this rectangle and selecting this, so I only have one viewer active, and let's view media out, 1 on the keyboard, and now we see all that. So we've got this connected, we've got the correct inputs and outputs going on. You'll notice that as I have gone from the background plate to the drive dock, if I just go one and the other, or from the background to the media out, the color is very different. So one thing we can do is do a little bit of color correcting to match. This is a common thing with CG or just any other elements that you're bringing into your footage, is it usually doesn't match out right. So part of compositing is making sure that our plates match and look integrated. So let's do that. So I want to add a color corrector that only affects the drive dock. So I'm going to click on drive dock and I want to add a color corrector right here. So it's only applying to the drive dock. It does not affect my background plate. So I'll click on drive dock. Let's add a color corrector. This is a new node we haven't really talked about yet. So shift space. And let me just start typing color and you see some items come up. And I have color corrector selected, but you also see there is a CC, a little abbreviation after this, as well as some others. Many nodes have an abbreviation. So once you have memorized a few of these, sometimes just that abbreviation will help you add things faster. So because I know the color corrector, its shortcut is CC, I could type in CC, and that shows up. And I click add, and now I have that color corrector that has been added. You can also, let me just delete that and do that again. You can also just type color corrector. And if I did not have drive dock selected and I just click somewhere in my node area, type color, hit enter, I have my color corrector. It's just floating over here. I can connect that manually, or I can click and hold down on my color corrector. Then I hold down shift on my keyboard and drag it over this pipe connector until it changes colors. And when I release, it is now connected. So if I drag it around, you can see those inputs are moving around. So I know it is connected. Drive dock is going into the yellow input, the background input here, and then the output of that is going into my merge. So let's do a little bit of color so that this matches better. So I'm going to go to my inspector with my color corrector node active. You can see it is active because it has that red outline. If I click on a different node, you can see that my merge now has the red outline and I have merge controls in my inspector. So click on color corrector and I have some tools here. Let's go to another frame. I'll just start closer to the beginning here for now. And let's start moving some things. This is quite a bit lighter than the rest of my footage, so I might want to change my lift and take the black point, mostly controlling the dark values. And if I do that, let's bring that up for a second. And you see if I start bringing that up, if I bring it down, it's, well, in either direction, you can see it's affecting my whole image. That is not what I wanted. It shouldn't be happening because the color corrector is after my drive dock. But because I'm controlling the black point of my image, it does a little bit of extra effects because it's affecting the transparency. This is to do with alpha channel behavior, which we're not going to cover in too much detail today. So the shortcut I'm going to give you is the fix without the full details. But the short answer here is if you are color correcting something that has transparency and you affect the black points, the dark parts of the image, then it's going to look like it's applying to everything. So we can fix that by going to options. So this is within the color corrector controls in my inspector. It's by default on this correction tab. I can click over to options and I have this pre-divide, post-multiply checkbox. Let's check it. And you can see that suddenly everything I'm doing only applies to my drive dock plate, which is exactly what I want. So now I can move the lift up and down to my heart's content, and it is only affecting that element. So I don't actually need to do too much here. So I'm going to set this to point, say 0.006, do a little bit there. I can adjust my gain, bring sort of the midtones to match as needed. Where do I want that? Let's just do some numbers here and see how it works. So set that to 0.48. No, I want that brighter. I want this to about here. And then I also have gain, so that's bringing mostly the highlights down. So some combination of these sliders will tend to get you where you want. So I want this darker. Let's try that for now. And that looks better. So if I have my color corrector selected, I can click on this toggle right here and turn it off and on. I can also, on my keyboard, hit Command P, P for pass through. Turn it off and on, and I can see before and after of what I've done. So I'm not going to call it perfect, but we'll call it better. As you're using your sliders here, you can click and drag on the number itself or on the slider. And if you want more detail of like fine tuning for these sliders, rather than clicking and dragging on the number, you can command and click and drag or control on Windows, and then you have much more fine-tuned control. So you can be much more higher sensitivity of adjustments here. So I'm clicking and dragging a lot, but the effect is not great. Whereas if I'm not holding that down and I click and drag, it's doing some big moves. So again, command or control and click and drag on one of the numbers here. And we can see what we've done by turning off this toggle or hitting command or control on Windows and P to pass through the effects of this node. So now let's play through this a little bit and see that looks better than it was before. I'm going to do a little bit to the color here. So in my color corrector, I have, we've done lift, gamma, and gain, similar to some of the controls on the color page, but I also have this color wheel so I can drag the whole thing to be a certain color as well. Now, I don't need to do much here. I'm going to hit Command Z to go back, and I just want to subtly move the colors just a little bit in that direction. And that looks too much. It's better. And we're going for better. Don't need to go for perfect just yet. We're still learning. All right. So we've got a background plate. We have a foreground plate. We have that going into our color corrector, and then the results of that are being merged together. So we have one on top of the other, so we see the whole thing together. Now, this order that we have things in is important. If this color corrector is after drive dock, once we've done our pre-divide post-multiply, it is only affecting that. If I put this somewhere else, so if I have this color corrector out of there, I'm holding shift to drag it out of there, and then putting it onto this pipe, now it's affecting my whole image. So node order matters because things are merged together. So this is one image, and then color corrector is applied. So now that's applying to everything. If I have this color corrector before the merge, after the background plate, it is only applying to the background plate, and then the foreground is being merged on top. That's not what I want. So I have my color corrector, and I'll put it back where it was, right after the drive dock. So it's just applying to that element there. And again, to move things out of there, you can disconnect things manually by clicking on the pipes and moving it around. Or you can click and hold on a node, hit shift on your keyboard, hold that down, and then hover over this pipe so you can see it change color. It was white and now it's green and blue, and I let go and now it's connected. So these are our basic merge. We've merged, we've color corrected, we've got order of operations of the nodes. Any questions on that so far? Panelists, anything we should talk about live?
No, I think we're good here, and just move along. We're getting here to the
Cool.
questions, the open ones.
Yeah, and I see you've answered hundreds of questions already, so well done. Sure,
Yeah.
there's a lot of different questions happening, so sounds like you're doing great. All right, let's keep going. So if we just play through our footage, let me make this bigger just so we can see. And again, because I've hit Command F on my viewer, it resizes as I resize my viewer. But if I play through, we see this plate, my drive dock is now added, so that's good. But we'll notice a little problem here. This guy is adding a drive to his back, but his arms, his hands, and the drive he's trying to insert is going behind the new pack we've composited on top. That is not what we want. We need his arms to be in front of this piece, or else it doesn't look realistic. So what we'll want to do is cut out his arms, or at least cut out, technically we are cutting out this pack that we've composited so it does not cover up his arms. And we have a piece to do that. If I go to my media pool, I have this bit of media that is called hand roto. Let's drag it into my node flow, and I can close my media pool. And before we do anything, I'm going to rename it. So let's call this hand roto. Roto, in this case, refers to rotoscoping. So rotoscoping is the process of drawing or isolating a shape that is often manually drawn by creating shapes. There are tracking. There's things like Magic Mask and things like that. If you've used the color page that sort of do that to identify a shape. In this case, a VFX artist has done it manually and they've sent us this piece of media. And if I scrub through, it's just a shape right there, but that as the hand comes into the area, you can see that it is a white shape. That corresponds to the guy's hands and the drive. And we can use this to isolate our composite. So let's go here for now. Let's look at our media out. And now let's go scrub forward. I'm going to be, let's say, on frame 81. And what I want to do is make sure that his hands are cut out from the drive dock. So I can use this hand roto and connect it to the mask input of the drive dock. So I'm isolating this piece of media to the mask. So this is not something that we need to, for now, do manually. It's not like the square or the circle we added before, but this is its own separate thing that we can use as this to identify the transparency that someone else has given us. Thank you, someone else. So I'm going to put the hand roto into the blue mask input of the drive dock, and you can see there is a change. But it is, in fact, the opposite of what we want. So currently, this piece of media, is being isolated within the hand roto. I want to do the opposite. I want to isolate it everywhere except the hand roto. So I can go to my drive dock node here, click on that. I have this settings tab. So this is my inspector. I selected Drive Dock in the inspector. It's by default on this image tab. I can click on this settings tab. And here, there's this setting that is apply mask inverted. Some version of this is common because a mask will either do what you want it to, where it's isolating within a certain area, and then I can also say do the opposite of that. So in this case, apply mask inverted. I check that box, and now you can see that I have the Drive Dock, and it is visible everywhere except the area within the hand roto. So now if I scrub through my timeline, you can see that I'm seeing his arms going what looks like in front of the Drive Dock plate. So that is now correct. This looks a little more realistic. Since I'm seeing our composited Drive Dock, it's color matched to be a little better integrated with my background, and I'm isolating a section of it by connecting the hand roto to my effect mask input of the Drive Dock. Now, if you've gotten that far and you've connected it, just make sure that you do go to Inspector, Settings, and Apply Mask Inverted. Otherwise, I'm getting the opposite of what I want. In most cases, when you're dealing with masks, you'll either get exactly what you want or the opposite of what you want, in which case you can apply mask inverted. And that's a good first step. Was there a question? Oh, I see, Matt. Is there a difference in placing it to the mask input of the dock versus connecting it to the merge node? Yes. So ultimately, you can do either. So I can put my hand roto there, and you see I'm getting the same thing, and then I can go to my settings here, apply mask inverted, and I'm effectively doing the same thing. There are a couple reasons you might want to do one or the other. We can go into that. This is for a shot like this, it's not actually making a difference. So you see, I don't see anything different, but it comes into play where there is an order of operations that I want to be different. For example, if I put my hand roto into the Drive Dock, I'm cutting out this piece. So now this, you can see, has the hand area cut out, and that is now the shape that I'm compositing. Now, if I want all of that to be composited, and then from there, I have this shape, and then I blur the edges, for example. Let me take a look at my media out. I'm going to add a blur after the Drive Dock, and I bring that up. You can see that the edges of everything are blurry. That might be what I want. For this shot, it's not, but this is for example purposes. But now, if I instead add the hand roto to the mask, the effect mask of the merge, the blur is happening, and then I'm cutting it out. So you can see there's actually not that soft edge around the shape here. So in this case, I'm cutting it out and then, or I'm blurring, then cutting it out. If I did it this way, I'm cutting it out, then blurring. So you can see again, as I switch the inputs, that edge changes based on the order of operations of when that blur is happening. So for this particular shot, we're not blurring edges. We don't have a different order of operations that really makes a big effect. So the color corrector, whether we do it before or after we're cutting out the shape, doesn't make a difference. So in this case, we have it first, and that's what the book is, the method the book is using, because that works for this shot. So just keep in mind, what is it that you're trying to do and what order do you need things to happen? But there are many different ways to accomplish a similar task in Fusion based on what order you do the inputs. Just keep in mind um, what it is you're trying to accomplish. I guess this also brings up the point of why use nodes in the first place. For some of this stuff, it's very similar to using a layer-based system or putting things on the timeline just in layers. But this is an advantage where I can change the order of operations if I want to cut something out and then blur, or blur then cut something out. That is not something that a layer system can easily accomplish with just a switch of an input. So overall, looking pretty good. Anyone having any issues with these connections thus far? Let me know, let the panelists know, and we'll move on. All right, let's get into some other options here. Let's see. Jonathan saying, can we always have someone else do Roto for us? Maybe. It depends on what the project is and where you're working, and if you have other people to do it for you. Sometimes that's something you can outsource. Sometimes you can use a tool. There are things like if you have the studio version of DaVinci Resolve, there is, for example, the, oops, I can type, Magic Mask. So I can use that to identify a section and track it. And you can see it's actually done a decent job of identifying that section. So there are tools that can accomplish that. Magic Mask and some of these Neural Engine assisted things are studio version only. So that may not be accessible to everybody. And I try to keep most things that we're doing to be available to free version users as well. So we've got DaVinci Resolve and DaVinci Resolve Studio. Studio is the paid version, which includes some of these tools that can assist us in things like this, identifying pieces of our shots that we want to isolate. But for now, we're going with the overall concept of combining a mask with a piece of footage, with a plate, and then merging it together. Now, there's some other color things I want to do. I've got this shot, and it opens up, and I see some blue lights in there, and that's looking pretty good. But story-wise, the director is saying it would be cool if once the drive is inserted, it changes color as sort of a success indicator that something has happened. So let's do some things with color here. I'm going to navigate over here, and I want to identify just the brighter blue values of my drive dock. So I have a tool called LumaKeyer. So as I briefly mentioned before, keying is the process of identifying pixels based on their value. In this case, the LumaKeyer identifies parts of the image based on their luminance, their brightness values. So I'm going to grab the output of the drive dock, put that into my LumaKeyer, into that yellow-orange input, and let's just bring that into my viewer and see what's happening. So by default, it's grabbed some brighter values in here. Now I can adjust my slider settings. Again, I'm in the inspector. I have LumaKeyer node active, and I have this slider here to adjust the threshold of what I'm grabbing. So I can grab my low point and start dragging this, and you can see some pixels are going away. Let me drag it here. Probably want it somewhere around there where I'm not losing too much in the low end. And then I drag the high point down a bit, and that's taking away or adding back some of those brighter pixels. So for now, I'm going to keep it About there. We can refine it later as we go. And what I'm going to do is add some color correction to my footage here that is only going to be applied into the areas I've identified here with my Luma keyer. So I've got merge 1. Let me do that slower. I'm going to click in my node area here, shift space. I'm going to type in color, and I find my color corrector, hit add, and I can do my inputs manually, or once those are connected, I just click and then hold down shift, drag that over my pipe, make sure it changes color, and release, and now it is connected. You can always test that by dragging this around. Sometimes, if you just click and drag and put it over there, it looks like it's connected. But if I then move it around, you can see that it's not. It's just in that spot. So click and hold on color corrector, hold down shift, drag that over the pipe until it changes color. You can see it's not that color yet, and then as soon as I get here, it changes color and I release. Now as I drag this around, you can see that it is connected. It's doing what I want. Now if I view this color corrector, hit 1 on my keyboard, I'm viewing my output of that. And if I start dragging my colors around, you can see it's happening after the merge, and it's affecting absolutely everything in my image. If I drag the whole thing to red, it's turned my whole image red. That's not what I want. I want to isolate the correction that I'm doing to just a few parts of the image. Those parts being what I identified in the Luma keyer. So my Luma keyer is bringing some values, and you can see that there's a lot of transparent area. So if I am on my color corrector, I can drag the output of the Luma keyer. So again, this gray square, drag that into the effect mask. So again, I'm limiting my color corrector with the mask that was created by using the Luma key. Drag that over the blue circle, or right click on my output, hover over the color corrector, release, and then choose effect mask. And now you can see what I've done is I've isolated the effects of that color corrector that was turning everything red. Now it's only applying to the bright areas I identified in my Luma keyer. And I can now see that my Luma keyer is not perfect. I'm getting some sections right here. I could try to adjust some things in my mask if I want, but I might just leave it for now because we're going for a general idea here. This is not Disney asking me to do a finished version for Marvel. We're just learning. So we focus on the principles here, not quite final perfect output. At least not yet.
It will work on Flash.
What's that? Oh, did you? Did we?
Yes, it will work in the new Flash movie.
Oh yeah, well, because we just turn more bits red. It'll blend right in. All right. Let's see. I saw a question here of what mouse highlighting app am I using? And this is one I believe is for Mac only, but it's called Pro Mouse. So it's just giving me this mouse highlighting thing, and then I can also draw a little bit. Pamela's wondering, how did the Luma keyer select the color range? Yeah, so let's go back to that. So the Luma keyer is taking an input, so it needs an input from a background. And whatever's going in there, it's trying to identify the brightest, or it's trying to identify things within a luminance range. So technically what I'm doing here is isolating the pixels that are between 35% brightness and 77% brightness. If I Let me add another Luma key here. Luma key. You may also notice that there's two. I don't know if this is relevant to. I don't think this was the case when the book was written, but there is a Luma keyer that is a color effect, and then there's a Luma keyer that is a fusion native effect, which is why I'm seeing two things here. So technically, the second one that does not have the shortcut after it is sort of the resolve color effect, and this Luma keyer is the default fusion one. If you ever run into seeing multiples of the same thing, that's usually what they are. So anything that is a fusion native tool um, tends to have this shortcut, the abbreviation after it. This is somewhat it may cause some confusion, but ultimately this is just part of what happens when you're bringing a bunch of different tools together. And Fusion was a standalone app that has been integrated into here. So if you see multiple things that are named similarly, that is why. So the Luma keyer I'm adding is the one that is Luma keyer, has this icon right there, and it has the LKY shortcut after it. So if I add that, and let me just take the background plate, feed that into my Luma keyer just so we can see what's happening. So once I do that, nothing's that's not even the one I wanted. Okay, why? So once I have that, immediately it's created a lot of things that are transparent, where it's taken the darkest pixels, made them transparent. You can see, and if this is confusing, we can take off our checker underlay in that three dot menu. So anything that's dark is transparent, anything that's bright is not. And these sliders that I have here bring the threshold up or down so that I can, anything that's dark will get darker and be black, and anything that is brighter will be brighter. So now I'm isolating the lightest values in my image here. But what I've done here is done that same thing for my drive dock plate. So this plate is somewhat dark. And by bringing it into this Luma keyer, I'm identifying the brightest parts of it, which are generally the blue glowy light parts. There are a few reflections on here that are not those blue lights, and that can be affected by just changing the threshold settings here. We can also mask that, but for now, we can leave as is. And I'm going to go to my three dot menu and recheck checker underlay, just so I see what exactly is transparent. So I've got my color corrector, and I've changed a lot of those lights to red. Let's see. You'll notice that if I zoom in here, so I'm command and middle wheel scroll with my mouse, that I'm getting some hard edges here, so I'm not quite grabbing all of these luminance values. Let me drag that down a bit, get that closer to what I had before. Again, we're not going for perfect, but I am seeing some hard edges here. That's not quite what I want. So I can affect that mask that I've created by blurring it. So on my Luma keyer, I'll click on that, and let's hit Shift Space. I'm going to type in blur, add that, and already it's made a little bit of a difference. But let me just blur that a lot and we can see what's happening here. So if I bring that up a lot, and I view that, actually, you can see that's very blurry. I feel like that's a lot. I might not want that. Let's bring that down just a bit. See what 1.8 looks like. Let's try that for now. So it's made things softer. I feel like I might want to do a little more finessing with that. But let's adjust the color here and see how that fixes things. So I can bring up the gain to make these parts brighter. That may also help this blend in. So let's bring the gain up. So now it's a kind of a brighter, it looks brighter red. Do 1.7. And because it's brighter, it's lost a little bit of saturation, so I can bring that up a bit. Let's double that, see how that looks. So that's very bright, very saturated. Maybe I can back that off a bit. And it's at least better. So click on my viewer, hit Command F, and you can see this is now actually affecting a lot of my image, and it's affecting it throughout. I did mention before that the director wanted the red to show up when the drive was inserted. So let's do some keyframing. So keyframing, just like on other pages within DaVinci Resolve and other apps, is just affecting what happens over time with an image, an effect, or anything else you're working with. Let's start over here. I'll be on frame 70. And I didn't go over this before, but you can see the frame number of the clip that I'm on right here. So my timeline by default, as I scrub through this timeline, it just shows frame numbers. So the first frame is 0, starts at 0, and then goes to the end. And this corresponds to the clip on the timeline. You can see that on this side, there is a 0 and there's a 115. So it shows me the range that I have here of my clip. I'm going from frame 0 to frame 115. And then whichever frame I'm currently on, in addition to having this red marker here, I also see that frame number there. So if I can scrub here, or I can double click that type of frame and go to that frame. Now, an easy thing to do to activate something, any node on or off, is to affect a blend slider. So in this color corrector, if I go to settings, I have this blend. So this is just opacity, basically, of this effect. So if I set it to 0, you can see it's gone to blue. If I bring it all the way up to 1, which is 100%, it's now red. So that effect is the opacity, or the blend, is affected by the slider. So that's actually available on pretty much every node. So if I go to merge, I have a blend slider here, but we're going to be on this color corrector, and we're going to animate this blend slider to go from blue to red. So let's say I start on frame 70, and I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to make sure my blend is at 1, which means it's 100% on. Now, I want it to, I guess, activate there for now. Let's just call it there for now. And then I'm going to go back earlier after, or I guess before those drive docs open up. Let's say frame 55 here. I'm going to click next to blend, click this diamond icon right here, and that adds a new keyframe. And you can also see if I scrub it, it's going to be a little hard to see, but there's a little white mark there on that frame, and there's another one on frame 70. So those shows you where my keyframes are. And if I'm here on my blend slider, you can see that keyframe indicator is gray, but if I go to that frame, you can see now it's red, meaning there is a keyframe on that frame. So I've created a keyframe here. I'm going to take this blend slider all the way to 0, so that effect will be off. So now if I go before that and play through, you can see it's blue, and then it transitions to red as I play. So it's animating from 0 to 1, off to on. Now, let's say I wanted to change where those keyframes happen. I like those keyframes, I like what it's doing, but the timing is off. I can unselect this, I can change the keyframe, I can do a couple things manually in my slider here, but I also have this keyframes panel. So let me click on this up here, keyframes. If I open that up, it shows me a whole different panel here. And if I select color corrector, I have color corrector here. I can twirl down this icon here and I can see, uh-oh, my mouse just froze up. One second. Progress. All right, there we go. Crisis averted. All right, so I've got my color corrector node that I can see here, and I can see that blend parameter in there. Now, this is showing me quite a lot. So what I can do is I have this zoom to fit icon that's right here, and I can just click on that, and it shows me the range of what I'm working with. So I can see my clip, and the color correctors, here, 0 to 115, that shows me my frames, and then if I can zoom in just a bit with my command and scroll wheel, I can see the keyframes here. Let me move the playhead off just so we can see those keyframes. So I can see that line, that is my first keyframe, and I can see the second line, and that is my second keyframe. So if I want to do something to that, it's a little hard to press in the interface. I won't lie, it's not the easiest thing to grab, but if I click, you can see it highlights a little bit, and I can click on it and drag that around to earlier or later, or I can click and lasso and drag both of them, and now I can drag them both at the same time together. So if I want everything I did with the same timing between them, I just want it to be later, I can do that. And again, changing some zoom in here may be helpful. So I have this slider right here that shows me the extent of what I'm doing. So you can zoom using that. And I can also command on a Mac or control on Windows and middle scroll wheel to affect my zoom in there. And if you see a lot in here, there may be a preference to do. So in the three-dot menu on the keyframes panel, I have show all, show none, show only selected tools. So if all is there, it will show me everything that I have a keyframe for. So if you have keyframes on a bunch of different nodes, a lot may show up. I only have it on one node for now, so it's not. But if I need to, I can click here, show only selected tools so that I'm only working on the one tool. Let me add a keyframe here just so we can see the difference. So if I have show only selected tools unchecked, I have color corrector and I have merge, since both of those have keyframes on it. And if that's just a lot to look at, I can go to the three-dot menu and click show only selected tools and then select my color corrector. And now I'm only seeing that tool show up here, and I can twirl down that so I see the parameter I'm animating, and then I can click or hover and select one of these things, or lasso a couple tools, or just lasso the one and then click and drag to get that where I want. So now I can close keyframes and let's just view what I've done again. So I've got, oh, let me undo what I did to the merge. Don't want any keyframes on that. Okay, now that should work. So I have my drive dock composited on top. It starts off as blue. And as we go, the keyframes have it transition to red. And his arms are coming through because we have the hand roto going into the drive dock to isolate that. And we're isolating the color corrector that's happening here because we have that Luma keyer. Any questions about keyframes and the compositing items we've done so far?
Well,
See,
there is
oh,
a question
yep.
in the Q&A about how to use the keyframes, that you can also use it with masking, with polygons.
Yes.
Everything.
You can pretty much create a keyframe for almost anything. So a mask, for example, like this hand roto, we're using as a mask. Actually, that's just a media, so I can't do that. But what we were doing before with like a circle, an ellipse mask, this is just an image, and there are things like level, which is also sort of transparency here, and this has a diamond next to it. So I could animate that mask, or let's say in the like a merge has this blend slider. So, if I have this merge here, I'm merging this piece, but I can keyframe that blend slider on the merge. I can keyframe, the basically any of the controls here because there is a diamond next to it. This blur that I'm doing has this diamond next to the blur size, so I can animate it and create a keyframe here to keep it as is, and then I can blur it and have another keyframe on a different frame, and then that will animate over time. So I can do just about anything with keyframing changes. I could even adjust the, you know, the parameters for my Luma keyer of like grab all the values and then a few frames later change that to only adjust other values. In this case, I don't need that, but you have the option for a lot of tools. I'm not going to say all of them, but many of them. And then whichever tools you use, you can go up here to the keyframes panel, click on that, open it up. And if you need more room with this, you can close the inspector. I can actually close my node area and resize this. So, if you're dealing with a lot of keyframes or just want to simplify your workspace while you're doing it, open and close panels, and then I can see just this. Go to my tool, zoom as needed, and then show only selected tools just so I see what I'm working with. I can zoom in with command here just to see my area, and then hover over my keyframe and click it and adjust as needed. And then to close that, I can close my keyframe panel up here. And now it's just the viewer, so I can go up here to the upper left, click on nodes, and bring my nodes back. As you work, there's a lot of different panels here that you may using. You might be in nodes, you might be in keyframes, you might open the inspector. Especially if you have a smaller screen, it's a good idea just to open and close panels as needed, just to focus your workspace on that. You can also bind those to custom shortcuts. Quick tip that's fun. I'm going to hit Option Command K, or that's Option Control K on Windows. And then we have, I think it's a workspace. I've already done it, so I don't remember where I put it, but there are show panels. Yeah. So, for example, nodes, a node area. I've bound that to Control N. So I can hit Control N and it opens and closes my node panel. So if I want to open the keyframes and get the nodes out of the way, I do that custom shortcut. That is not a Resolve default shortcut. That is something that I added. So if you want to bind your panels and user interface panels to some shortcuts, it's just here, and we're going to Command Option K on Windows, Control Alt K on Command Option K on Mac, Control Alt K on Windows. Go to Workspace, and then we have Show Panel in Workspace. Twirl that down, and there's a bunch of the panels. Some are on all pages, like Inspector, some are not, like nodes. So you can choose those and click on it and add your own keyboard shortcut if you want. If you prefer to click, that's just fine too. They're all just up here in the upper left and upper right corners, and that works pretty well. So highly recommend getting in the habit of opening and closing panels to get them out of the way when you don't need them. What else? Any more questions around what we've done so far?
I think we're good. We can move on.
All right, let's keep going.
Took a lot. I'm just writing like a crazy here.
All good. We've got hundreds of questions answered, so I'm sure there's plenty. Not too much more for this lesson. So, there's just a few other things we can do. So let's view our media out, see what we've got so far. So we have our composite, we have the drive dock with some color corrector to match. We've isolated with the roto. We've identified some brighter pixels and blurred them, and then set those to be red. And then we've keyframed that so it happens gradually over time. Now, there is some crossover with the types of things you can do over Fusion and Color Page, for example. Like we looked at this color corrector, and some of those tools are similar to what's available on the Color Page. There are other things we can do, like adding a vignette to a clip. So if we wanted to do that here, we can. Why you do something in one page or another depends on what you're doing, where in the process you are, or your preference. So, but I do want to show off some of these things here. So I have this tool. I'm going to click on color corrector so it happens after the color corrector. Shift space, and I'm going to type in VIG. I want a vignette. So this is just the Resolve tool that's available here as a node in Fusion. I'm going to click add. And now I have this vignette node that has been added. Let's click on it, and I'm hitting 1 on my keyboard, so that shows up in my viewer. And so immediately we can see that it is added. So if I hit Command P, that toggles it on and off. So I'm applying this effect to my shot. And let's change this, because this is pretty drastic. So I have a slider here that's the size. I can go from all the way open to all the way closed. And, if you're doing something cartoony, just like fading out to a particular object, I guess this is a good way to do that. But I just want something a little more subtle. So I'll bring this around 0.8. And I also have this control. Well, I do have anamorphism. So if you were trying to have this be like a lens, this is covering how wide this is, but I'm not going to do too much with that. In fact, I'll reset it. One way to reset it, any parameter in Fusion, is just double click on the name of the parameter. So you see here I have anamorphism and I have dragged this around. The default setting is that dot there. I could click on that dot, but that is very small. It's hard to get to sometimes. So what I like to do is just double click on the name of a parameter. So double click, you see it's at 2.8 now. Double click on the title and it resets to its default. If I wanted to do that with size, double click on size and it goes back to the node default. So let me drag that back to about where I had it before. Let me add some, let's see what the softness does. So this is getting very soft. This is getting pretty close to hard edges. I want somewhere in between. So let's say about 0.4, somewhere in there. And if I toggle that on and off, you can see what I've done. Just have a bit of a vignette effect on this shot. If that's what I want here, I've got it. And it's easy to apply, just as its own new node. Now, if you're having trouble with playback at this point, that is okay. Fusion is rather resource intensive, but there are some things we can do to help. So part of that depends on the speed of your computer. Part of it depends on what codec your footage is. Some of that depends on how much you're doing. Are you doing a lot of tracking? Are you doing a lot of compositing and all sorts of things? This is not a particularly intensive process here relative to a lot of other VFX, but not everyone is working on a professional post-production workstation from some, high-end company. Sometimes you're working on a potato on an airplane because the thing needs to be done. So we have some caching options that we can talk about a little bit here. You see, if I switch back to my edit page, there's I have caching on, so already there was this red icon line over my clip. It is now just turned blue, meaning it's cached. So now if I play back, it's actually going to play back pretty smoothly. These caching options exist here: playback, render cache, and by default it's usually at none. I have smart enabled, which basically means if there's a transition or any fusion composition, render in the background once I'm back on the edit page. So you can see that. Let me turn it off, render cache, set to none. And those lines have gone away, so it's not caching, it's not playing from the cache. My playback speed might be slower. I'm on a pretty well spec'd machine, so it's not having any issues, but when you start and stop a lot, you might run into some things. So in order to turn caching back on, you can go to playback, render cache. In this case, select smart, and it's just going to operate with the assumption that if there's a fusion composition, it should cache. So now when I play back, it's playing back from the cache. You can also adjust your cache settings. If I go to project settings and you can hit the gear icon in the lower right corner here, or you can hit Shift 9 on the keyboard. And I've got my master settings. So master settings here, scroll down to optimize media and render cache. There's a couple relevant things here. There's this option, render cache format, and I'm not sure why it's set to this, but currently these frames are set to be uncompressed 10-bit footage. So it's actually doing a fairly high quality output for my render cache. I think that was the default setup in this project, in the Resolve download that's available on the website that you're using with. I think that's just part of the project settings here. Generally, I set this to something like a ProRes 422 or 422 proxy, especially if I don't need it to be super high quality playback. It's more for quick playback of things that I want 2C, so it might be this, might be 422. You can set it to a higher quality thing like a ProRes 444 or and that would be on Mac. So if you're on Windows, DNX or Mac can do both. So that option there is what format is your cache rendering to? You cannot access the cache. This is not a file you should be able to view or share. It's just for within Resolve, so it plays back smoothly. Also, you can set the location that those are rendered to. So ideally, you would have this on your fastest drive. So cache is media that is being rendered for immediate playback and for fast playback. So if you have, let's say, a work drive with your footage on it that is fairly slow, if it's an old USB or a spinning disk drive or something like that, that's probably not a good place to put your cache here. So I would recommend, I mean, if you only have your one drive, like your one internal drive, it can be there by default. It's on your user folder, at least on a Mac. Here, this is actually the default for this. I prefer to have a separate cache drive that is Thunderbolt connected and super fast, so that any rendering happens to that very quickly. So I can browse, select a new cache location, which would be here, and I have a section for that already. So you can change that if you want. So again, cache, you can change the format of that with render cache format in your project settings, in the cache file location over here under working folders. And then you can turn on and off cache by going to playback, render cache, none, or smart. User is different in that it responds to a few user settings. So you kind of right click and manually tell it render cache, Fusion output. And you can manually set it to like definitely do it on this or off. So don't render cache, let's say on this one. If I'm not using that clip, render cache off, and then it won't cache the fusion effects that are happening on that clip. If you feel like manually affecting some of those things, you can. I most of the time keep things set to render cache smart, so it's working in the background. It is pretty smart. It does what I need to do most of the time. So I would recommend that for most cases, unless you have a strong reason to not use that. What else can I say about cache? There's a more recent addition are being able to manage your render cache. So so I have render cache and I can change that. I can delete my render cache. So if there's, if I'm done with the project, the cache that I've created is taking up a lot of space on my drive, and this is an old project, I can just delete the render cache and just select all. It's asking me to delete project cache. This is not deleting my media. This has nothing to do with the stuff in my media bin. It's not going to delete my footage. It's in a totally different spot. These are not files that I should even ever manually touch. This is just the caching that is done in the background for playback. So I can go to Fusion. Nope, sorry. Playback. Delete render cache. And I can select all to do everything for this project. Unused for the ones that, are of previous versions of what I got. What that means is this has cached, but if I go back to Fusion and I turn off something, I have changed my comp. So when I go back to the edit page, that has turned to red again, and it's going to cache a new version. So if I want to get rid of the old versions, it doesn't delete that by default. So I can go to playback, delete render cache unused, and it's going to delete unused render cache files. So any cache that is not currently being used in this project. I can also use it just for the selected clip. So just this clip, playback, delete render cache, selected clips. It asks me, do I want to delete the clip cache for this selected clip? And because you're probably not working with just one project in Resolve, you probably have several projects. There is now a way, as of, I think this was new in version 19, maybe a little bit before that. Certainly before this book was written, manage render cache. I have this here, and now I have a whole interface that can show me all of my databases, all project libraries, or any of them, and I can choose, just one particular project and say, that one, I don't want it. I select a number of things here, and so this is selected, and I can say clear selected cache for that project, and it deletes that cache. Let's do this one. I can select that, clear selected cache, and I've deleted the cache for that project. And you can also change, to my network or my cloud account, change your project library. You can view each project library. You can view them all. And that might take a while for me because I have a lot. And you can see all your stuff in there. So feel free to use that to manage your cache if your drive is filling up with cache for projects you haven't touched in a while. You may want to get rid of that so that your drive isn't bogged down with files that aren't being used. Any questions about cache or any of the things we did on this shot?
Yes, we have
Great.
actually a few questions about that.
Yeah.
I think that one of the most important questions is how does DaVinci Resolve works with this render cache when you go to the deliver page?
Excuse me. Okay. Good question. One second. My water node got disactivated. Okay. Render cache on the deliver page. Short answer. Oops. Let's go to the deliver page. Short answer, it's not. The render cache, by default, is for playback. So the default behavior in Resolve is when I'm going to my deliver page here, it's referencing your original media. So whatever is in your media pool, that's what's being shown in the timeline. That's what's being used to render out your final thing. So the render cache is just for your playback. You can change those settings slightly if you want. Only do this if you have a good reason to do it. But you can see if I, here in my export, there's advanced settings. Click on that, and I have this setting right here, use render cached images. And it is unchecked by default. So again, it is not using the cache when you render out by default. One reason you might do that is if you have very hard to read or let's say resource intensive, if it's raw media, if it's an EXR, if it's a very compressed file format, and then your cache is something that is faster, like your cache is ProRes, which will be faster to read and use. You could use that. If your render cache is low quality, then it's a good reason not to do that. So again, by default, it doesn't touch it on the render page, but you can manually activate it if for some reason you want to. That is similar if we're not really covering it this week, but if you are familiar with the proxy workflows that Resolve offers of creating proxy versions of your files so you have smaller or easier to play back things. The proxies are not by default used when you are rendering out in Resolve on the deliver page, but you can activate that manually by selecting use proxy media so that you're rendering from that. The only reason I actually use either of those is when I'm doing a low quality preview, because usually either the proxy or the render cache is a lower quality version than my original media. So by default, you can leave those off. it references your original media. If you are doing a preview, a render, or something where you want to use that cache or the proxies or anything like that, you have those options here. What else?
Do we have time to review just really fast the parameters that you use in the luminance here?
Yeah. We actually only have plenty of time scheduled, so we're gonna end early today.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you one more. So, okay, just review the parameters you use in
Yeah.
the luminance and also how you create the keyframes. Okay, one question here from Marty
Sure,
and
yeah.
from Matt.
So the LumaKeyer here, let me add a new one and just start from scratch. Um, so again, adding a node, shift space, type in what I want. I've got this LumaKeyer. If I connect my drive dock, at least this is what we're doing here, connect that there, and I view that in my viewer. By default, let's go to the area, the frame where we see the bright areas. So by default, it's already taking out a lot of pixels. So the job, as the LumaKeyer sees it, is it saying, hey, just show generally the brighter pixels. And then I set my parameters here, the low end to so that it's taking away what this is actually doing. You know what? Let me show. We're not going to get into this until tomorrow, but I think it's easier to see what this is doing if we're talking about channels. So my transparency here is based on an alpha channel. Alpha channel is just a matte, essentially, that shows me how transparent pixels are. I can see that in my viewer. I have this section where I can see color channels. So right now I'm just viewing full color. And I can also see just red channel, just green channel, just blue channel. And then I have this alpha option. So I'm going to select that. And right now, you can see that anything that's black is transparent, anything that is bright is not, and everything in between is semi-transparent. And as I change my threshold sliders on my LumaKeyer, you can see that by bringing down the black point, anything that's dark is getting darker. So I'm adding, these sliders are creating contrast in my alpha channel. So by dragging this that way, I'm bringing the threshold for my dark pixels in one direction. Let me make this a little bigger. And then changing the high point, I'm changing the threshold for what the bright pixels are. So this is effectively a contrast adjustment if you think about it in context of this alpha channel. Now, if we go back to the color channels, I just hit C on the keyboard. This is what we were looking at before. It's a little harder to see as I'm creating transparency, but all I'm doing is just changing these parameters until the things I want to disappear are gone. And if you want, you can use the alpha channel for that. So again, I can use the channel viewer of my viewer and switch to alpha, or I can select my viewer and hit A on my keyboard to view the alpha channel. And now I can see pretty clearly what the transparent areas are and what the opaque areas will be. So this is the mask that I'm creating. And then, so that, because it's creating that alpha channel, that is what we've created here with this LumaKeyer, and that is being read as a mask because it's going into my color corrector here, going into the blue input. And this blur thing we're doing is actually just blurring that mask. So if I blur that, we can see just hard to see on this, but go back to our color channel. Oh, I'm not even viewing the right thing. There we go. So the blur is applying in there, and then all of that is being fed into the mask. And keyframes was the other thing. So keyframes are created by going to a frame. So let's actually go to our color corrector here. Actually, let me create a new one. Color corrector. I've got this. And just for fun, let's make everything bright yellow. Let's say green. That looks better. So right now, it's turning everything green. I've moved the output of here into my mask input, and now I've created, using that mask, it just turns all this stuff green. Turn that off and on with Command P, or this toggle right here. Now, in order for this to change over time, I could change any of these parameters. Like I could adjust contrast and keyframe that, but because we already have this is effectively what we want, just everything here. So all we need to do is keyframe the blend slider. So this blend slider is just the opacity of this effect. So I can drag it manually up and down. And I set a keyframe on any parameter just by hitting this button, this little diamond icon next to the parameter. So a good rule of thumb is to be on the frame where you want it, where you want to create a keyframe. So let's say I'm starting here when these drives start opening up. And I'm going to create a keyframe here that turns red. I'm on frame 54. I'm going to drag that blend slider to 0. Because there's no keyframes before this, that's just what everything is up until this point. Now, I'll go, let's say, once the drives finish opening up, right there, it's frame 70. I'm going to, now that I'm on frame 70, you can see that is not red because there's no keyframe here yet. I'm going to click on that icon. Now it turns red. I've created a new keyframe on frame 70. And now that I've done that, I can change this blend slider up to 1. So the blend is now fully there. It's 100%. And you can see these little white markers here for where my keyframes are. Now between the keyframes, it has animated. Resolve is interpolating the values between there. So on frame 54, it's at 0. On frame 70, it's at 1. But if I drag between there, you can see that the value is changing each frame. Oops, there we go. So we're here, and it's changing as I bounce between the frames. So it's just animating from 0 to 1. And if I'm not on one of those keyframes, you can see actually over here, I have, next to my keyframe icons, I have this left and right arrow that will send me to the keyframe. So if I click on the one on the left, it says go to previous keyframe. So now I've gone to frame 54. There's no keyframes before this, so I don't have the left arrow, but I do have a right arrow. So I can click on that to go to my next keyframe. And there I am. So that's an easy way to get to each keyframe so that you don't have to manually get there in my timeline here. And then if I need to edit the values of those or want to change the timing using a different interface, I can open up my keyframe panel, drag down over here. I tend to use this zoom to fit, so I'm just seeing the area of the clip. I see my keyframes there. If you don't, just twirl down that setting. There we go. And I've got my keyframes there. And if I want that to start earlier, I can just click and drag this keyframe earlier. Or if I want the second one to start later, I click and drag on that keyframe. Or if I want to drag them both together, not change the distance between them, but I want to change the overall time, I can click and drag lasso. Now they're both selected, and if I click, I can move them both, keeping them equidistant and moving it there. And if I close that keyframe panel, you can see those keyframe marks are now here. They're in their different spot. I will open up the inspector, and those keyframes are indicated with these red diamonds next to that parameter. All right. So we'll take a few more questions, but that is lesson one. That's everything I wanted to cover today on this. So we're going pretty relatively slowly through the basic principles of compositing being foreground over background, using masks to isolate our changes, using a couple different nodes, in this case, color corrector, blur, luma keyer, just a few things where we're affecting what we're doing to the image and how we're working with it, as well as we've covered user interface, keyframes, how to get around getting into Fusion, things like that. We'll expand on those in the future lessons, but this is already a start and a good start of the principles of figuring out how to affect existing footage in Fusion. Um, so let's spend these last few minutes on a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go early so that you have time to let this settle in your brain. So we're ready for tomorrow. So, panelists, what other questions should we cover, or any other workflow tips you think would be fun to add in these last couple minutes?
Yeah, we are good. We are, and the questions here, they were all answered.
Great.
Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what will be seen tomorrow and the last day or in the advanced, just to like a sneak peek, something like this, you know?
Oh, sure. Let's do a little sneak peek. So we're gonna have it's in the same download as what we've done before. So let me do this
Um,
archive, and I'll go over these steps tomorrow.
yeah, just to
Um,
let you know, some students, they ask, are we going to talk about color management? Are we going to talk about keyframing? Are we going to talk about green screen? So
yeah.
if you
So
just
short
short,
answer is yes.
yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so let me quickly go back to the agenda that I shared earlier. Here we go. So tomorrow we're going to cover replacing the sky. This is a fairly common VFX thing of, there's a bright blue sky or there's a blown out sky and there's nothing in it. We want some clouds. So how do we identify the pixels that are there? Similar to what we did with the Luma key today. So we're just identifying some parts of the image that we want to replace or do something with. So we're going to, now that I have this project here, we're going to, uh, we have this shot right here, and we can see it's just a almost white sky, kind of boring. And the director said, hey, I want some clouds. So we got this image, and we'll take a piece of it and put that in the background and blend it in with our footage so we have a more interesting looking sky. Now, there's some challenges here because you can see the camera is moving a little bit if I play through. So we will need to either stabilize our footage or track the motion of the camera here so that our sky matches. So we talk a little bit about tracking. We'll talk a little bit about keying, which is identifying the pieces of the sky, and then masking, um, limiting the effect of that image to just the sky area. We're also going to be talking about replacement. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about replacing signs or screens. We'll be working on this, so this was from a project and we have a white van with some X's on it, and we're going to want to remove those X's and instead put a logo on here so that the side of the car, the logo on the car fits the story of what this project is. So we'll talk about replacing the side of this van effectively, um, adding on a piece of the logo we want on there, as well as tracking. So identifying the motion of the van using these X's as help so that we can see how it moves so that we can get the logo piece to move along with it. And then we also have to remove these X's. So we're talking about painting things out. This is relevant not only for removing tracking markers, but also if you have a boom in your shot,
You see it kind of come in. This happens all the time where just a little microphone comes in shot. We'll need to know how to remove things. So this is, I don't think we'll be working on a shot that has that, but it will be the same principle of removing and painting out an item in a shot. So that's tomorrow. And then we'll finish out day 3 with some green screen work. So similar to keying a sky or the keying of what we've done today of just identifying a few pixels is where we have a lot more to replace. So this is just a guy on a green background plus tracking markers, and then being able to identify all these pixels, remove it, making sure the edges around him are good so that it doesn't look like there's pieces of him missing or no reflections from the green screen on him as we move in a different background. So that is what's to come. These are lesson today. If you were following along in the Resolve PDF or the Fusion PDF, that today was lesson 1. Tomorrow is as much as we can get through of lesson 3 and 4. And then Wednesday we may finish lesson 4 if we don't get to it tomorrow, and then we'll move on to lesson 5. So, like I said before, this is not quite the full Fusion certification curriculum that we have this week because we only have 3 days, and the version 19 book is coming, but it's not ready just yet. So we wanted to do something a little more introductory and an overview here, and then there will be an advanced couple of days to do more Fusion VFX things in a few weeks. So yeah, would that cover everything for preview, Chris? Good to go?
Yeah.
All right,
That's
cool. I'm excited about these shots. I'm not going to say that they're easy, but I believe that you can get to them. We'll go through pretty step by step. So I'll leave the Zoom open just for a few minutes in case you have any last minute questions to put in the chat. I'll try to get to a couple if there's more. And then you can also reference any links that are in the chat if you hadn't grabbed those yet. So well done today. Good luck. Rest well. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same Zoom link. And yeah, nice work. Thanks, panelists. See you tomorrow.
my pleasure. Have a good day, everyone.
See you tomorrow.